Evening. Good evening, greetings. I'm Ben Prosky, Director of Events at the Graduate School of Architecture. Thank you so much for coming. I could stand up here and tell you a long story about how this evening came about, so I'm going to have to be cut off if I start doing that. But this is exciting. We're in the middle of a big project with the School of the Arts, and this evening is an extension of it. Several years ago, I guess, we got a grant with the School of the Arts to start working together, and Columbia, as most of you know, is under Galia Salomonoff and Liam Gillick's guidance, is going to design a summer pavilion with students from the School of the Arts and the School of Architecture. And this is really a first, because if anyone has tried to even build a matchstick house on the campus here, it'll get shut down. So I shouldn't say that too much because we still have some talks to do, but it will be done in time for commencement. And so we're so happy that you're all here because we now want to look towards some really wonderful people who have done really creative work with temporary structures, and that's who you're going to hear from tonight. So I will pass it to Galia, who will introduce the speakers.
Hello, I'm going to introduce the speakers and a bit of the reason behind why we want to do a pavilion. There's two definitions, there's two etymological traces to the word pavilion. One, according to Beatriz Colomina, comes from the word papillon, meaning butterfly in French. And so the idea was that these lightweight structures appear in the summer, in gardens, and so the pavilion in that way is associated with a tent. Then there is the other potential etymological definition of pavilion coming from papilionem, a Latin word, and that word was refers to when a Roman warrior would go into an unknown territory. They would keep the standards, the map, below a tent. And I actually really like the definition of pavilion because I think it implies as you move into an unknown territory, you need to have a home. You need to have a place where you keep your bearings, you keep your maps, and also the idea that when you confront a new challenge and you have to settle the score, the place where peace agreements were signed was below the pavilion. So if it's your turn to go to somebody's pavilion, it's because you are conceding to that person power, and if you go to somebody else's pavilion, you will be giving up. So the idea that peace treaties and wars were settled under tents too, it's appealing to me. And related to that, there was this pavilion in 1958, Le Corbusier, and Xenakis, Ambarese. Yeah, thank you. It's great. It's great, and I recommend that you see it. But I just want to tease you with this, and you can see it later. And so, in 1958, Le Corbusier, Barese, and Xenakis built for the Philips company, a Dutch company that does electronics, a pavilion. This was after World War II. It was the first international exhibition, and the idea was to gather all the arts under one roof. That's the building. The building was a concrete shell building that's like most pavilions, they exist for a very short time and then they disappear forever. There's no, this doesn't exist anymore. There's no models of it. And so they constructed a poem electronique, an electronic poem, and that had colors and music, and this is a small piece from that pavilion that, as I present the speakers, I would like you to see. The idea was to not showcase within the pavilion the technology of Philip per se, not as an object, but to demonstrate what technology could do to unite the different arts. And so the reason why I'm interested in this tonight is because I think that we could update this idea. We could do a much more modest construction than this probably, and think about the new challenges that the arts can demonstrate and make an effort to present an idea together. I'm very happy to be teaching with Liam Gillick. It's a challenge to teach two different sets of students, art students and architecture students. They have different attitudes. You know, we are just few buildings apart, but there are many different attitudes towards construction, towards the way we view problems, the way we position ourselves critically to our surroundings. So it's a challenging combination, and I hope we'll get to build something together. And so Liam Giddick graduated from Goldsmith College in 1987. In 1989, he mounted his first solo gallery exhibition, 84 Diagrams, in London, together with Damien Hirst, Sarah Lucas, Angela Bullock, and Henry Bond. He's considered one of the earliest members of the YBAs, Young British Artists, who dominated England since the 90s. In 2002, Gillick was nominated for the Turner Prize. In 2009, Gillick represented Germany in the Venice Biennale. In October 1, 2010, in an open letter to the British government, he co-signed with 27 previous Turner Prize nominees and 19 winners, and opposed all cuts to public fundings for the arts. Gillick is one of the graduate committee's members of the Center for Curatorial Studies in Contemporary Art and Culture at Bard College. I'll give you Liam Gillick.
Here we go. All right. Good evening. There should be a PowerPoint up there somewhere. Just it was getting good. I'd like to just acknowledge the generosity of the architecture department at tolerating this collaboration, and I'm just going to do a very short presentation, but just to point out one or two structural things that in the last 20 years, primarily my experience of the interchange between architecture and art, or some discussion about the possibilities of the built world, has tended to assume that the best structure to do that within is some kind of notionally open framework that usually is something that we could recognize within a contemporary art context. And what's very important for this kind of collaboration is that we're really taking the lead from the way the architecture department is structured and the way this attempt to build this temporary building is geared is towards doing something within the context of architecture. So that makes an enormous difference to the stakes become different. They don't necessarily become higher, they just become of a different order. That all of the usual free-flowing talks about the idea of open discourse or the architecture of the possible or the kind of micro-utopias that have been proposed over the last 20 years in the art context are all troubled and agitated and disturbed by the fact that we have a concrete, literal thing to have to achieve. Now, what I'm going to do quickly is do two things. One is to show you images that are just evidence, that I'll try and show as a sort of backdrop, that are images of things I've been involved with, to show the extent to which and they span a 20-year period, to show the extent to which some forms of art have been dealing with this idea of the temporary structure or the pavilion, as it were, as an ongoing process. But at the same time, one of the things that I think is important to talk about is that some people will assume that the common areas of this exercise are to do with what gets built, to do with the common interest in form. Whereas in fact, the hardest thing to really drag out are issues around use and people and the relationship between people and people and people and objects. And so in that light, I want to do a very short, well, it was short when I did it earlier, short reading from the work of an artist, a French artist called Philippe Perreno, who in 1996 presented an event in Dijon called Snow Dancing. Now, the book that was the artwork didn't really describe much of a building, didn't really describe much of a structure, but it did describe a kind of event. And by doing this, I just want to sort of set the scene for the evening and keep in our minds this idea of people and users and some kind of function, okay? And I'm going to try and change the photos at the same time. Okay, we must now describe, excuse me. We must now describe the people attending the event. They are eclectic, yet an eclecticism that has become the standard. In other words, diversity is normal. As with the building itself, there is no dominant style for the people who happen to be here. If you start to try and define a dress code for them, everything collapses. People are dressed in a way that indicates effort has been made, but without intending to produce real meaning. Details are not discussed, but accepted as long as they create diversity. Everyone's appearance is precise. A degree of sophistication is visible in a clear visual language capable of being read by everyone. Baggy, shapeless, faded jeans that make people appear blurred and ill-defined are popular. This corresponds to a way of seeing the world like a soft-focus fashion spread. Some people are wearing eyeglasses, but not to correct their vision, but to blur it slightly, to mimic a popular form of fashion advertising. It's pleasurable to see the world slightly out of focus. It helps one come to terms with marketing. Think about a washing detergent, where two items of clothing are washed in different detergents. One remains clear and colorful, the other is left faded and ill-defined. In the same way, at the event, some people are faded and other people are dressed in a rather rigid way, wearing stiff clothing. It's almost as if their jackets are too exacting for them, an effect that you get when you put on new clothing for the first time. Some people like their jackets or trousers to be always new, expensive looking and slightly uncomfortable, clothes designed by famous fashion designers or convincing fakes. Other people enjoy the padding found in cheap anoraks. They deliberately tear these coats to reveal the thick, white cotton interior. Everyone is the embodiment of a dress code, although there are many different styles of clothing. It's clear that people have thought hard about the way they should look. Imagine a dinner attended by people from several different countries. They all might agree to speak a common language in order to be understood, or they might decide to talk in a mix of languages. You can participate. You don't have to be like anyone else. You are supposed to be, at the same time, similar and dissimilar to everyone else. Identical and different is a slogan that you can see in many rooms. People want to be like other people while at the same time maintaining a strong identity. You can see people with a hairstyle that's long at the back, but short and neatly cut at the sides and top. Soccer players used to have this look. It's a haircut that has been carefully considered. This haircut reveals identification with the working classes. The people who do not have energy to create a hairstyle wear wigs that don't require so much effort. At the party, there is a place to buy a wig so people can change their look at any moment. Some people are wearing big, heavy engineer's boots, while others might be wearing the kind of footwear that you might put on to go scuba diving. Each type of footwear completely covers the foot and ankle. You can visit a shoemaker at the party. The shoemaker will cut revolutionary slogans in the soles of your shoes. People leave tracks in the dirt and dust on the floor, reminiscent of the first footprints on the moon. People can get keys cut at the same time. The locksmith generally cuts the same key over and over again. By the end of the party, he may have made 500 copies of the key that opens all the doors. The place belongs to the community. So if you lock a door, anyone can open it. There are other places where you can put together a look. People pick out different items to compose an outfit. The shopkeepers ignore you. Some people like day-glow clothes, like a kind of luminous vests worn by rail workers, safety clothing. Like in Formula One, people are covered in logos. Inevitably, some people at the event look as if they are sponsored, not the building, with color schemes derivative of various labels. Most of the participants are locals. Even the people coming from a long distance look like they're locals. People dance a lot. Maybe this defines their level of commitment. Others just drink. There are no children. They stay outside and wait in cars or buses looked after by an old man. Everyone seems to spend the same amount of money. Wealth is not revealed by people's spending habits. Maybe this is because everything here is free. However, there is a difference in the way people speak. It does not necessarily betray class, and anyway, a lot of people alter their accent. Homogenization is helped by the fact that people are wearing so many layers of clothes that it's hard to tell if they're beautiful or ugly. Some might say everyone is perfect. The general impression is that people are handsome, charming, and sexy, but maybe too fat, too thin, too tall, or too short. A lot of discussions take place, but nothing of any great significance is said. Some of the people are really engaged, almost as if they're being paid to have a good time. This is not dissimilar to Euro Disney. Some people are the motor of the event. At our event, you don't know exactly who animates who. There are also passive groups who take observer status. They don't react. They read a lot, talk a great deal, and sometimes exchange pictures taken during the event in the same way that children make collections of things. It is not clear what they say to each other, mumbling a bit. Conversations are difficult to overhear. Passive people stick together. People at the event enjoy playing games. Games remind people of their constant interaction and existence. For them, play allows access to power. These are not ordinary games, but abstract ones, where rules can always change. It's hard to control a situation where rules change constantly. Dominant power structures in society, like government and bureaucracy, are not successful games because they do not understand the potential of play. The entire world is the domain where the creative impulse of the party can be deployed. Think about the resold shoes. Then you can start to imagine that the whole community is linked together by playful but not imposed ideals. This is the key to the revolutionary impulse of this promotional event. Thank you.
I have Bazaar bio in my BlackBerry. Bazaar Grit is the founding partner of C2 Studio, Born in England to Turkish parents, he came to the US at age 3 and grew up in New Jersey. He attended the Cooper Union School of Architecture, graduating in 2005, at which point he started the firm with 4 other classmates. He has previously taught at the undergraduate architecture department at Pratt Institute.
Thank you, Galia. And thank you to Columbia University. It's quite an honor to be invited to present here. So I'll be presenting 3 pavilions today, which were part of a series that we call the Solar Pavilions. They're quite small scale and temporary works. They were only up for about a few days at a time. The first one we built in 2006, the Solar Pavilion 1. Second one in 2007, and the third one in 2008. The original event that they were made for, or the original client, is this organization called Solar One, which is a environmental nonprofit organization. And they hold this event every summer called City Soul, which is basically this 3-day long street festival that takes place in this park. It's kind of, there's music, they have bands performing, they have food and drinks and various art and informational exhibits. And so in 2006 they invited us to make something for this event. And we basically, through this organization, we got a donation of a large amount of cardboard tubes. So we took this opportunity to build a pavilion, an actual usable space within this area. So this was about a 2,000 or about 1,000 square foot roof structure that provided shade, and there were seating areas within this roof. There was a ticket booth, food and drink stands, and various exhibits were mounted in different areas under this roof. So the first year turned out fairly successfully, so they invited us back the following year, which had a much larger turnout. There were quite a number of popular bands performing, and so this was the one covered area that people could go under to watch the performances. And then the third year, again, the same event occurred, and one of the days of this festival, they organized a series of presentations and a panel discussion which was held. And we made this kind of auditorium-like area within part of the pavilion to have these presentations. So this event was 3 days long, so we didn't want to just make something that would only live for this 3-day-long event. So we really had in mind the desire to create a traveling pavilion. So the main theme was deployability, especially in the second and third iterations of this project. So part of this was mobility, being able to transport the pavilion quickly and easily, flat packing it, and then really have this thing have multiple lives. So what you see here is the third pavilion, which in its largest manifestation was about 3,000 square feet, and it's all flat packed into this one 24-foot truck on its way to one of the events. And the other aspect of this idea of deployability was reconfigurability. So we didn't want to just move it from place to place, but the real idea was, can we build it differently each time? So depending on the needs of each venue and the site conditions and how the people might flow through the space, we wanted to really be able to transform the structure. So just to go through, these 4 right here are all Solar Pavilion 2. So we basically made these diagrams of each of the 4 manifestations of it, which I'll just show you in some more detail. So this was the first one at City Sol with the bar in the middle, and then various other programs. And then the second manifestation was at the Dumbo Art Festival, where the pavilion took on this very linear form. It sort of functioned like a shaded arcade along this pathway that led from the street to the left to the Brooklyn Bridge Park over to the right. So it was this like entry passage leading to the park where there was a series of art installations. And then a few months after that, we put everything back on the truck and drove it down to Miami for the art fair. And the pavilion, we built it there in front of the Scope Art Fair as this sort of entry portico. So the fair itself was held in this white tent behind the structure, and our pavilion served as a filter to guide the visitors into that space. There was 3 passages, this like tunnel space to the right, which was for the general public, one to the left for the VIP, and then there was a central passage that was the exit for out of the tent. And then finally, we had the pavilion in a container for a year, and we took it out one last time a year later to take it to the All Points West Music Festival in Liberty State Park, New Jersey. And here it was kind of this rest pavilion. It was a bit in a large field away from the 2 main music venues, and we made it to have these 2 views toward the 2 stages, and then a third view looking out into the Hudson River waterfront. So one thing to mention with these diagrams, these were all produced after the event. They were sort of like a way to document what had developed during the installation. Prior to arriving at a site, we never really defined what the form would be. The project was really about developing certain assembly logics. In each of the 3 pavilions, there's a certain rule sets that we develop for how parts go together. So the way that what these drawings are serving to show is this notation of different types of line correspond to different a hierarchy of members, each one having different characteristics that determine where in the structure they go. So when we'd arrive at a site, we'd really, we'd get there with a group of people, a truck full of parts, and we kind of quickly sketch out what we might want to do with the structure there, have some idea about how people would interact with it, and whether there were other functions that the pavilion would serve. So we'd have this kind of really quick sketch of some sort of direction, and then we basically begin this this participatory event of the installation. And in many cases, we'd have a different group of volunteers assisting us with this. So we'd really just teach them those basic assembly rules, and then this sort of free-form growth process would proceed, where we're really just guiding this development, changing it, modifying it, making it wider or narrower, adding a passage here or there. It was really this like fluid, free-form kind of construction. So no one part really has any position. It's much more of this, almost like this bottom-up paradigm of growth, where we're not really following a plan that's predefined, but it's more of like this open-ended process that could potentially continue endlessly. So this is the first manifestation of Pavilion 3 at the City Soul And some images of it complete. The basic system here is essentially these lattice-like plywood strips that are woven in a certain pattern, and they can flat pack, and they're pinned together with these aluminum connectors. And then on site, with these other linear struts, they're basically expanded out. So they can travel flat, and then they just get pulled out to create volume. And then there's this secondary system of vinyl membranes that were suspended beneath the plywood armature, producing shade. Now, this idea of a system of assembly that's driving the form was really defined through an articulation of the details. We'd have some basic idea about a structural system that we'd basically resolve it, and through really defining how the connections would work, we would develop the degree of flexibility and while also achieving the structural strength that would be required. So basically, this is showing the second pavilion, and the basic system here on the bottom right is it consists of these series of plywood strips that have an interlocking edge detail, and they basically notch into each other and are held together with zip ties. And if you remove certain key joints, this whole unit can basically collapse into a flat bundle. So likewise, similar to the Pavilion 3, they travel flat, and then you expand it out, put these key connections back in, and add additional members, and it becomes a stable form. And so once we had this basic idea, we would proceed through kind of evolving this joint, which both gave us a flexibility and structural strength. And we were trying to fine-tune this, the geometry of this. Oops. So that it would serve our needs. And they have this, it became this zigzagging form, which is really a result of certain practical constraints of manufacturing. So it's basically a single cut is producing two sides of two parts. And essentially there was no waste. Every part of the sheet that's left over has this joint, and it is capable of connecting anywhere in the structure. So here's just the installation sequence in Miami. It would basically take one day to put up a majority of the structure. And then a second day when basically with any additional members that are put in serve to further stiffen the structure. So it kind of like was made itself rigid over time as we installed more pieces. And then here in the second day, we're adding this secondary system to provide shade, which in this case were these semi-flexible plastic panels. And so these flexible panels also were malleable enough that they could kind of follow the geometry of the resulting plywood structure. So one of the ways that we're really working at this, and central to our practice in general, is through building. We have a shop in Brooklyn adjacent to our office. And all of these pavilions develop through building at a full scale and making mock-ups and testing them to see if we could get the flexibility and deployability that we were looking for. And so we basically build at from smaller mock-ups up to larger and larger ones. We'd get temporary spaces in our building. Do fairly rigorous structural analyses. And then take it out to an empty lot to do run-throughs outside, test it, see how it handled the wind and the rain. And I'll just finish with this last video showing the production of the third pavilion, basically all the various machinery and things that we did during its development. And we built all of these ourselves, and I mean that really, for a project like this, it was only really possible for us to do it ourselves. I mean, because we were really, besides being low-budget projects, we were working with this idea of reconfigurability and working without drawings. So it was really only possible that we had the means to go and just build these. And though they're very temporary, very short-term, small projects, they did allow us to experiment at an architectural level, and not having to worry about issues like codes and, because they're for very small events, there was never really issues that they had to be applying to fire codes or other liabilities. So it'll be interesting. These were projects we started within 1 year of coming out of school, so it'll be interesting to see how certain ideas like these can still become present in our future work as, in more permanent pavilions and other projects. These were, we made a series of lights out of crushed glass, and that's what these are showing. Yeah, thank you.
So the good thing of being in your 40s is that you can say, I know Charles Renfro from 17, 18 years ago, and so that is the case with the last two people in the panel. Charles graduated from Columbia in 1994, the same year that I did. He's a practicing architect based in New York City. Renfro was an associate at Smith Miller Hawkinson before joining Diller Scofidio in 1997. He has served as project leader on Brasserie, I-Beam, the Band Master Plan with OMA, Blur, the Boston Institute of Contemporary Art. Recently, Renfro has served as design principal for the redesign and expansion of the Juilliard School, Alice Tully Hall, public spaces at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, the High Line, and the Museum of Image and Sound in Rio de Janeiro, among other projects. Renfro is a graduate of Rice University and holds a master's degree from GSAPP and is teaching at Parsons currently. I'll give you Charles Renfro.
Hey there, it's great to be back. I don't get up here very often. It's not bad to commute, actually, on the west side, so maybe I'll try to make it. I think I'm doing 6 events this semester up here. Something crazy, but anyway, it's great to be back. I'm gonna it's gonna be really short. And so I'm just gonna talk about one project that we're working on. I mean, you might know that we've done our fair share of temporary structures around the world, and one in particular that you might know is called the Blur Building. It was built in 2002. It was made of lake water from Lake Neuchâtel. It lasted for 6 months and then it was imploded, despite the fact that it was only 4 columns of steel. So, but that, I mean, speaks to the temporary nature of these things. The pavilion that I'm going to show today is for the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C., right on the mall. It is temporary. It is a permanent temporary pavilion, or a temporary permanent pavilion. We can figure out what it is. But it's built to be to occupy its same site over and over. I'll talk more about that as I get through the slides. There's the mall. How do I do this as a PC? Oh, that. Okay, you know, Macs don't have keyboards anymore. I mean, you just speak and everything sort of. Anyway, it's on the south side of the mall. Gordon Bunshaft Building, iconic structure. It's oh good. You know, it's a classical modernism in that it mirrors a park that pre-existed. The Hirshhorn across the mall. It's part of the Smithsonian, of course. Means it's a free museum, which is pretty cool. It's a terribly you know, this is when the Hirshhorn was made. It was actually originally planned to be off center. The whole was going to be asymmetrically positioned in the museum, which is kind of interesting. And now it's actually smack in the middle. These are some of the original drawings, but it's a pure form. It's inviolable. So when the director, Richard Koszela, came to us and said, we need you guys to help us think about how to make an event space and a cafe and a lobby and, you know, all the things that museums need in their lives to stay financially secure. You know, we looked at the museum and were faced with that dilemma. A closed donut of a building. It doesn't lend itself to permanent addition, and yet it has plenty of space in the hole of the donut. There's not even really a lobby, so to speak, much less a place for events or bar mitzvahs or weddings or things that museums make their money doing these things now. It's also Smithsonian, which means it sort of serves a sort of higher, or it's ruled by a higher decision-making body, which is the United States government, which makes it harder to get things approved. And also, since it's on the mall, and the mall has very strict building codes, and it's difficult to do anything there. We know from having been one of the competitors for the National African American Museum, and people lose competitions. Anyway, we have a place in our office that's like, I call it, you know, I call it the cemetery, and it's made of tombstones. It's all our boards that we've submitted for competitions that have all been lost, and there are probably about 200 boards there, and we just thumbed through them, and this was one of them. It was very sad. At any rate, what was clever... We feel sorry. Shush. Okay, never mind. We've been doing better now. But anyway, Richard Koszela sort of actually thought that maybe there would be a way to make something temporary, and we agreed, and we identified the courtyard, of course, as being the opportunity, and also the exposed plaza that's protected from weather underneath the rings of the donut. And of course, we started thinking about the inflate structure. It's a pretty, it's a pretty logical solution. There's been a lot of work done in inflate structures, including OMA's work. And, there's a lot of really great developments in recent years, and not a lot, but several companies around the world that are really at the forefront of pushing the envelope, so to speak, in this form. So anyway, we just started thinking about the whole, and what you could do with a hole. And, so you can have fun with holes, especially, yeah. And so the concept, it's really simple, that we make a soft structure that inflates and provides new space for the museum. And so that's it, and it does that. And this will happen twice a year for 1 month every year in the fall and the spring. And they'll have a series of events, symposia, there's a new cafe, etc. I'm just going to sort of go through the stuff. It's pretty obvious what it is. There's a little cafe. It's sort of like a herniated disc. It sort of oozes out from underneath the form of the donut. And it provides this sort of inside-outside experience on the ground floor, which there isn't such a thing at the museum yet. This is looking at it. I think this is from the mall, but I always get confused. No, actually, this is from the street. So it will provide a new profile. And what was so brilliant about the idea that Richard came up with, which was to use the hole in some way, is we were able to sort of get around all of the legislative and code and zoning, not code, but zoning issues around working in the mall, or at least most of them. They've been much more lenient. So the pavilion as a way to not make people unsafe, but as a way to expand the potential of space making is a really interesting concept. This pavilion, it's a low pressure inflate, which means that it's almost a room fan that keeps it up. Not much more than that. It is air conditioned and heated, so it really is internal space. It's got a high degree of soundproofing, actually, and it allows us to present theatrical pieces on stage. It has different configurations, so it can seat hundreds of people in the theater, in its theater configuration, and then also it has this cafe, this sort of part that oozes out, which can serve as a pre-function area. All the things you'll learn about when you start designing museums. And anyway, it's highly reconfigurable and with screens on all sides. So it's a it uses the concept of the donut of the pavilion of the original museum as a way to sort of reinforce the strength of that idea and not to thwart it necessarily. So we're working with Fisher Dax and Jaffe Holden, a team that we've worked with on many theater projects. So it's being treated as a serious presentation space, despite the fact that it's only there for 2 months of the year. And it will have the ability to change its acoustical properties depending on what things are in it.
What's the material?
Okay, it's I should have said that. Thank you. It's actually pretty standard fiber reinforced. What is that called? It's the stuff that you see. It's actually translucent. We're taking liberties with the skin, making it a bit more transparent. But we are putting sections of transparent material within the PVC. It's PVC basically. But it's foldable and you can pack it up, and it lasts for many years. However, the transparent stuff has to be replaced over the years because it's much more fragile. But when it's not serving an event, it can actually just be an installation. I'm going to show you a couple things about the way it's made. So in fact, it's a little more cloudy than this, but it will change the way that the circuit around the galleries works, and really turn it into a special time to be there. Sort of the Bibendum Michelin Man time, and it leaves space. It leaves space here, so it's constructing a lot of different experience within the museum simply by holding itself away from the edge. of the building. This is a sort of an erection sequence. There's a tension ring on the outside of this thing. Actually weighs a lot, so we're adding a new structure around the inside of the inside edge of the museum to hold the thing up. So the way this works is it's unfurled in the plaza. It's lifted, hoisted up with this new ring as the structure, and equipment that's up here that keeps it inflated, sort of out of sight. The fabric is dropped down by gravity, and then it's inflated with this equipment here. And that's what it is. Pretty simple stuff. So thank you.
And the last person to present tonight, before we discuss the projects, is Shohei Shigematsu. When Liam was reading about this Parino party, there were many episodes in that text that reminded me of our life at OMA back in the 90s, where I met Joe. He joined OMA in 1998 and became a partner in 2008. He has led the OMA office in New York since 2006. He is currently in charge of Cornell University new buildings for the College of Architecture, Art and Planning in Ithaca. Shigematsu was a project leader for the winning competition entry for CCTV headquarters in Beijing and has been a driving force in conceptual projects such as Universal headquarters in Los Angeles, the Whitney Museum extension in New York, the Tokyo Vertical Campus, the China National Museum, and Prada epicenters for Shanghai and London. Shohei is teaching at GSAPP this semester.
Hi, we also have a tomb losing competitions, and recently it's made by Dylan Scafidio Renfro, so it was a kind of irony. This is a term that is commonly used in Japan, scrap and built. I just want to go really diverse level of temporality, I guess, compared to a very restrained previous speaker. So I show a lot of slides very fast. This is the buildings. Well, let's say Japanese cities are pretty much defined by natural disasters. These are the kind of dwellings that are lost through a lot of flooding, typhoons, and fire. As you know, there are some big disasters such as this one. And not to mention the war itself, which actually you can see this is the center of Tokyo that destroyed this much. This was the image. And of course, no wonder that all the movement that came after this war had something to do with this completely emptiness after the war. And also the general history of being destroyed by natural disasters. And now even this is done by architects in the same generation as I am. You can always see some ephemerality in their building. This is Ishigami's cube that floats. Let's say maybe Cedric Price was one of the architects who defined temporary structure as how programmatic events in individual interaction can define basically architecture rather than the other way around. And you can see the Fun Palace, which was supposed to run 24 hours with these programmatic boxes hanging from the ceiling. And that was done in 60s, but this is the expo in 70s, in 70 in Osaka, which had a programmatic roof As you might know, these boxes actually moved around according to the events that happened underneath. And also, Cedric was the first one to maybe took the inflatables as the most seriously, basically. These are the proposal for the zoo. And he even proposed a system inflatable to clean the seaside. As Charles showed, these were the inflatable done by RAM. I was in London, Pavilion, you know all this. But of course, the main purpose was to hold an event, which had a lot of events, one of which was 24 hours marathon interviews. And of course, when it's illuminated pink, it's always celebrity events. This is a very important event for fundraising for Serpentine. We also did a tent for European Union. We designed a flag for European Union, as you might know. As opposed to a blue and boring monotonous flag, we extracted the colors of each members and then made a color barcode. And then that became our new proposal for the flag. And we made a circus tent in the central roundabout in Brussels, which had a kind of a ring structure that has a ring of meeting table and the ring of history of Europe and history of European Union around. This was inside, very busy as always. Some attractions. This was inside. This was the entire EU constitution bound into one. So it was a kind of one long book, how cumbersome to become an EU member. And also it became a perfect backdrop for all the protests in Brussels. It moved to Austria. The flag was deployed even more. And for your former president was used. For Prada, we've done a series of different temporary events and structure and a lot of diverse interventions. First of all, we do a fashion show 2 times per year. This is one of the proposals that everyone gets the first row, since the fashion show, the row determines the kind of power. This was a little bit more 3-dimensional version. This was almost like an arena, where, as if they're gonna start like fighting, but it was a kind of fashion show. I want to also show a temporary store, because the pop-up stores became one of the typology to kind of promote brands, let's say, eagerness to infiltrate in the city. This was done by Comme des Garçons in London, Dover Street Market. Prada was inspired by this and wanted to make the similar store. In Brompton, close to Harrods, in a very awkward space, was a former Porsche garage next to a furniture store, next to a bar, pub, and also even the, as you can see, the facade was L-shaped. So this was inside. It was supposed to be temporary and very low budget. But the interesting thing was that Prada owned at the time a lot of different brands. So it was the first time that Prada wanted to show all the brands in one store. So what we decided is to combine the department store typology, which has one big floor, one curated floor with different brands, and the select shop, which has different brands in a kind of multi-story store. First thing we did is to make a so-called mask. So we installed the similar regular Prada store in the front, so that everyone get disguised. But through the back door, you can go to this temporary store with shredded wall. I show you a couple of studies because I think that's more interesting. These were the shapes that has different themes that defines the residual space also. This was again using existing column grid, which was completely weird because it was a hybrid of different spaces. And we used the fabric to define, basically wrap all the existing columns and create a different space. That creates a very awkward and strange object. This was, we wanted to do something completely different for the store environment because we were a little bit sick of, let's say, providing a store that sells. So we thought that we could just insert the Boeing into the space and use it as a backdrop for the store. Of course, it didn't go through. This is the other one. We installed series of different pedestals, almost like sea of them in a different size, different scale, seemingly very random. But we started to program them by orientation, like this, that all this orientation has shelves, or the other orientation has a picture or art. So that seemingly random, you can start to define the program within the store. But in the end, we showed, well, this was the chosen one. So we studied, of course, all the stores, and we discovered that a lot of stores nowadays have a kind of overview. So we thought we articulated that as an overdose of overviews. So we wanted to make something more mysterious. This is a store. So something that almost looks like the fabric of London. Like La Villette Park that OMA proposed in the 80s, like a series of programmatic bands, which we thought it was interesting because of the irregular shape of the store. The customer don't know how long this sequence continues, basically. So it's a series of just kind of installed walls. So when you enter, you can go as long as you want, but you never know where to end. And the idea was to just install the walls and do nothing else within the store. That evolved, that was in London, that evolved to a store in Shanghai. It became even more extreme. This is Bund, this is Pudong. There's a boardwalk here, and underneath there are a lot of Chinese local retails, which we wanted to insert the pop-up store. So there's a parking underneath the boardwalk where we wanted to insert the store, and we wanted to keep certain existing stores like this. So basically you have Prada stores next to all the local retails. As you can imagine, it didn't happen either. But we keep thinking about this. This is an exhibition design for Prada skirts, 100 skirts. It was a traveling exhibition we designed. We were charged to show the movement of the skirt while we are not showing, of course, a model wearing a skirt. So what we came up with is to show all these, a giant flat mannequin we call, 2.5 times of the actual size in your face, and then have them arrayed like this one-sided mirror. So people are forced to walk in the forest of legs like this. This is the actual, it's hung from the ceiling. This is on the mirror side, it kind of disappears in a certain angle. Another display, which was, because it was traveling like a C2 studio, we had to anticipate how it's going to travel. So we used this vacuum packed method and vacuum packed the skirt, which is typically the elevation, you get to see the elevation, but you never get to see the plan. So we chose the skirts that has interesting plans. Some skirt had a very like a thick fabric or the three-dimensional cut that it standed by its own without any support like this. So we showed them as a sculpture. And some skirt, we used the ceiling fans to rotate them, and then use this mirror to see the backside or let's underside, which of course the team was all men, so it reflects that. So this is another one, it's called pendulum. So we use the wiper motor of the car to simulate. So it has a battery here, so it has no electricity, the trace of electricity. So people were, of course, wondering how it is. And the final project that I want to show is the so-called transformer. I guess the whole effort with Prada somehow came together in this project. So Prada wanted to do an event not only for fashion, but also for their art collection, cinema collection, and a fashion exhibition. So what we decided is to create a pavilion that can transform for all 4 events with one structure. So we, let's say, allocated the like 4 different plans optimized for each event, and then made a triangular pyramid like this, and then decide to rotate each time there is an event, for each event. This was a structure. For a while, we didn't really know, we knew exactly how we wanted, but we didn't know how to clad it in the end. But we discovered this material called cocoon. It was originally made for B-29s, to protect the B-29s. How ironical is that? They bomb all the Japanese cities. But anyway, these are the kind of the advertisement from that time. It's actually quite interesting. Bridgeability, elongation. I love these pictures. It's like stretchability, mill thickness. So all this kind of military now it's also used for storages and for still military purpose. So we use that membrane to cover the entire building. You basically spray them, and then it stretches after that with a chemical reaction, and it creates the most logical 3-dimensional curve. Basically, it stretches to fit. So this is how we rotate it. And so this was the cinema configuration. This was the artist's installation. And at the end, it was dismantled by local art students and fashion students and used as an event space. In there, the first exhibition was that fashion exhibition that we did. The idea was that since this was the first event in the transformer, and we wanted to imply that what you see on the wall will become a floor in the future. So we used those mannequins that I showed you earlier to walk on the different surface, like this in the end. And the most beautiful moment in this pavilion came when they installed this, so I just want to show you. So this was a scaffolding just to put those mannequins onto the different surface. It's like a Pyreneesian. And then all these guys moving one by one, fixing. And from outside at night, you can see all this scaffolding. Thank you.
Here, yes, yes. Here, yes, 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 yes.
Okay.
Charles? Pasar, sí, sí, sí.
I think some people have to go to different things. It's not personal. Some of them have to go to
Yeah, some people have
because
to.
it's like 8 o'clock.
It's
so
8
they have
o'clock,
things to
yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah. So I have many questions, but should we start with a question from them to us? Yes?
You were all speaking about creating events. So I was wondering which notational tool you have in regard of that will show.
Sorry, I missed your first one. We were all speaking.
All the presentations were about events.
Yes.
So these events are events between people. So I'm wondering which notational tool do you use in terms of writing or graphicizing what you are expecting from this. So if there is something like in the music that you have a notational writing or just section and drawing. So how are you representing an event between people?
Shaw, do you want to?
Did you understand the question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Can you?
I'll say Photoshop.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, drawing.
Seriously.
Well, drawing and photoshopping. Yeah.
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 Okay. So you do several to represent in time, or just a Photoshop to give the feeling, and that's it?
But I think the representation is like a planning of the event itself. To come up with the event
Exactly.
is basically what you're talking about, I guess. After planning, there's certain rules how to achieve them or how to simulate them. So
I also feel like in the case of the European pavilion that you did, it's more about coming up with the elements, the objects, you would say, because they're not sculptures, they're not architecture, they're certain objects that will spur a type of reaction. And the way people, the events that happen are not new, but the way the objects present themselves to the people and the thinking process they generate, it's what it's supposed to be, what is new. It's not like people are going to walk differently. It's not like we have to come up with notations for choreographing or anything like that. It's more about the assemblage of a narrative in terms of objects that are part of a narrative, I would say.
But I think if I may elevate the discussion to something similar, but I think there is a certain aesthetics and longing of the architects to dream of such a space, like a temporary space where you no longer have any code, as you were saying, nor any sprinklers. And I think it was also very clear the juxtaposition of the temporality and permanence in Charles's project. And I think that's something that the temporary structure always has this kind of strange feeling of all those open-endedness, I guess.
But I have a question, which is maybe directed at you, which is that I think, to a certain extent, all of us are aware that pavilions in the 20th century are what I've been starting to think of as a almost sort of positive deception, meaning that we accept that we can suspend our doubt and disbelief in the Belgian political system or the operations of Philips as a multinational company and its involvement in whatever it may have done and whatever technologies it may have contributed to. And the same with the function of the pavilion as a space to pop up and make a gentrifying area appear attractive and all these other things. So the question is really about the architect's responsibility in terms of the ethics of deploying a pavilion. You know, what kind of discussions do you guys get into when you're working for these festivals and art fairs? Because there's a big difference between a community festival and an art fair, for example. They're completely different beasts, but by deploying the pavilion in both sites, it seems to imply that there is a kind of equivalence of eventness that can't be distinguished, you know, there's no discrimination between the two types of thing.
Well, I mean, to some extent, it's just like the movement of people within that event is something that we're kind of exploring. That I mean, there's issues related to the specific events themselves, but at some level, we're really just trying to see how can we affect the way people would interact with this structure. You know, if they're at this big concert venue, like the All Points West, it's this like massive 3-day-long thing, which is like, you know, it's like millions of dollars go into this one event versus the other community event, which is very tiny, but it's just got like a whole different audience that we have to try to see how we can interact with them.
But do you recognize this idea that there is some strange lure about this idea of the building that is not a building, or it has this temporary quality that is very appealing, but also extremely complicated, because it's the moment when you have this sort of paradox in a way that we assume that, to a certain extent, the architect or architects are doing what they want to do. Like, this isn't an expression of their uncompromised desires, but at the same time, it also has to represent unresolvable differences in a strange way. It's got this weird paradox. It seems that OMA get around it by, like with the European thing, that you do it by literally showing off the very things that are the problem, like the great big constitution, which is an amazing thing. But I don't know.
Well, in this text by Andrea Phillips says that, you know, there are the pavilions that used to be an architecture that you walk in, and so it was about space, and then the pavilions became more and more like objects, like sculptures, and so it shifted from architecture to sculpture, and she, in one way, sees the pavilion becoming a specimen in itself, so that there would be no architects or sculptors doing, or artists doing pavilions. There will be pavilionists doing pavilions, like a new discipline, which I find very uncomfortable to think that it will become like, you know, an entire new set of expertise devoted to that. But there's, I think there is, today we saw like a degree of like the pavilion as a temporary building, but where the word building really carries its weight, it's a building, and the pavilion as a manifesto, that I would say the European pavilion, it's a kind of, it's a manifesto, it's an open book in a way, and the pavilion as a kind of a kit of parts, or
But it's sort of fascinating, the Hirschhorn thing, because in a way it's incredibly disruptive. I mean, if you look at it to a certain extent, it's incredibly disruptive. Could you talk a little bit about the differences in the way these things get judged, if you see what I mean? We had the jokey exchanges about competitions and so on. We all, even artists, are aware of this kind of procedure. But you did mention once, maybe you could talk about it a bit more, this idea that certain things are easier because it's inflatable or it's a pavilion and it's not a building.
Well, I just want to talk a little bit about your comment about the delirium of pavilion making, which is sort of what you're alluding to, which is sort of it's beyond. It doesn't have to play by the rules, and it's sort of like the spectacle, the idea of spectacle, and the delirium of the undoable, which is, I think, really optimistic. It's really interesting that it's about the future somehow, and so it seems to be about anticipating what could be, right? I mean, and maybe the thought is that it's leading to some form of thought or degree of thought which is more permanent in nature. I don't know if it's a stepping stone towards some sort of permanence or some sort of can our buildings start to actually be built to transform? Should they? I mean, I don't know. Or is that destined to simply be, a one-off kind of thing? I mean, it's really exciting, but are there lessons to be learned that could anticipate a future? And I mean, I guess I lost track of your initial question, but I sort of wanted to talk about that.
It was quite a technical one. It was literally about. I mean, it was very interesting the way you took it, but it was literally about. The pavilions also hypnotize the client in a way, in the same way that I'm prepared to accept. Don't get me wrong, I don't have any problem with Prada or any of these things, but if I like Prada much better than I thought I did earlier today. In fact, I think they're amazing, and I'm
going to come check
really
your labels in a second.
No, but do you see what I mean? There's something. But is there a moment where, of course, we all know that this is a logical thing that people think this is not going to be forever, and therefore it doesn't matter. But of course, as a brand, this thing might be the only thing that gets in the newspapers, the only thing that becomes visible. It has been the only news I've heard about the Hirshhorn in the last 20 years.
I think it's a little bit too much to say as if all architects are interested in temporary structure as their ultimate kind of utopian expression, because there are a lot of architects who actually create temporary structure for post-natural disasters or just a kind of local festivity event. I mean, it's just a kind of selection of people today just maybe gives you some kind of wrong idea. And I'm happy that someone like you is actually teaching a studio, because it avoids to become this kind of pavilion-like pavilion that always be in the kind of entrance of all the Ivy League schools, like this kind of put together like parts, whatever. And also, even in our cases, I think that it's not just temporary structure in our case, which we project certain hypnotize to the client. It's also a permanent structure. We are charged to in a way to give certain satisfaction that they have as a kind of, iconic structure. So I think it's a bit difficult to insert the kind of almost like an ethical level.
Sure. But I certainly don't want to make it seem like there's an artificial barrier. It's more to get you to define these things in a more precise way, because I think it certainly has come up. Sorry, I'm a bit. No. I'm watching too much TV. But it does lead to this other question, which it's really clear in the art context that in the last, since 1978, there's been, just to think of a date, there's been a clear developing difference between what museums and institutions collect, for example, and what they show in order to generate a kind of cultural capital to prove that they're doing something new and progressive and interesting. And is there, maybe someone could talk to this idea of whether or not how we deal with this issue, that the one thing that this Columbia project might have in common with, Europe or Prada or what have you, or trying to come up with a new type of structure, is that it, in a way, can let people off the hook. That the more you more you deal with temporariness in this way, that's kind of interesting, inherently interesting, there's no obligation to actually do anything interesting on a concrete level. Is there something to talk about?
Well, no, I wondered if you were getting to a critique of architecture by, in that question, right? I mean, you're saying...
Not in architecture, but just, it's about, if an artist accepts to do like a temporary project at a museum, but at the same time the museum will only buy other types of work, that their real investment is in something else. These things are relatively cheap. If we do something interesting, Columbia looks great, right? It'll look really sexy for very little money. Much sexier than the reality of maybe the real planned, built, to be built infrastructure of the place.
I think one of the things, though, is about shared space. And when a museum commissions like Doug Aiken to take over a whole block of the city of New York, that's a really democratic, really interesting way to think about using that space in many different ways over the course of time. And gives the artist a bigger voice and platform. And so there's a little, I don't know. I think it's slightly the wrong way to look at to frame the question, maybe, or something. I think all of these, my building too, our thing too, is a similar kind of deal. In the great weather, it goes away, and you're outside, and so I don't know.
But I think a lot of, when I first became aware of Cedric Price's work, which was introduced to me by architects, not by any art people, it seemed to be something that could be cultural architecture, meaning the architecture of cultural institutions, and yet it seems that there's a certain degree of conservatism about the way museum construction has been going, with a few exceptions. Yet the pavilion is always deployed in a way to somehow make everything seem okay.
Sure.
Somehow.
Whitewashing
but
problem.
I think one of the issues is that the bigger the building, or the bigger the object, being art or architecture, the more consensus you need around it. And so I think that when we look at a pavilion, when you look at an individual art piece, you maybe need the consensus of the artist and the person buying it, hanging it, talking about it. And so you're talking about the consensus of 1, 2, 3 people. And the larger, in the Doug Aiken, that I think is a very good example, in order to expose that in the city of New York, you need the consensus of hundreds of people. And I think in architecture, the pavilion is probably the smallest we can go, and the kind of the smallest consensus we can get. And so if we were proposing a new building on campus, either for a disaster relief or for to build the sweatshirts of the university, we would need, whatever the purpose, we would need the consensus of so many people. And for the pavilion, we need a lesser consensus. Therefore, there's a larger degree of freedom. And so, regardless of who the sponsor or the backers are, in architecture, we look for opportunities to minimize the amount of people we have to convince.
I don't think this discussion is so productive for the pavilion, because I'm a bit surprised you as an artist would, of course, know the kind of system of how to get funding. And I mean, it's not a joke that I showed that party in Serpentine. It's really used to get money for so to a certain degree you need attention. You need to cry for the attention. But what is maybe different is that architects, as I showed, most of the projects are still having clients. It's not like our desire that, it's not a spontaneous project, which maybe in your case here is slightly be a spontaneous project. I think that difference as a kind of ultimate outcome is an interesting one to see what the difference is. And I'm really looking forward to see.
Do you think, to what extent do you think we should, in this kind of we've got a semi-client in a way, we do sort of have one, but one that's somewhat indulgent and technically on our side. But to what extent should we, one thing that's really key about what you seem to do is you both inform the client a lot about things they don't know about, and also play with them. It seems really clear it's a bit like Philippe's book, you're kind of screwing with them a little bit in a productive way. But is that for you a central part of the process, right? If the client is kind of weak, do you have to prod them into life in a way? Do you have to wake them up?
I don't know what defines a weak client, but
Tolerant and whatever you want, for example, or just silent and bureaucratic, for example.
right. Well, it's true that nowadays people who want to use the pavilion as a communication strategy, marketing strategy, they're all powerful. That's no doubt. I mean, now Guggenheim is doing this mobile thing. Everyone is jumping onto it. It's just a kind of part of their campaign communication. Mm-hmm. So yes, in certain degree, like we have to ride on the wave and then come up with something that is artistic, which sometimes be, playing with them, and sometimes being really true to the need of the event inside.
One thing I would say about our thing with the Hirshhorn is the building. The Hirshhorn itself is incredibly iconic, and it was incredibly significant as a building to begin with, and remains, one of the most emblematic buildings in Washington. And I think what we were trying to do was actually meet the aspirations of that building with a new form of a new generation, and the event as a fundraising tool, which again, that's one of the primary things it's there for. It's expressing our current economic and social condition, but it's trying to do it formally in a way that's equivalent to the original. I mean, not equivalent, but in of a similar aspirational nature.
Right.
I also think from the Cedric Price times to now, there has been an increase in the relevance of the city and the appeal of events. You imagine like in the 70s, there was less people living in New York or London than there are now, and the events were of a different nature. Mm-hmm. And so I think many of these pavilions are about fulfilling that kind of, I would say, more primal desire to meet and greet. They're in the summer. That's why I think the Beatriz Colomina quote of a butterfly, or both wars and weddings and butterflies happen to happen mostly in spring and summer. And I think it has to do with, in the summer, it's when we want to expand our horizons, meet more, and either go to new territories, mm-hmm. or just, go out.
But I was thinking about all the work you've done in the shop and working on the temporary structures, that if you look at it from many perspectives, and you look at artists like Tobias Putri, or some works of Olafur Eliasson, some projects of Pierre Huyghe and other artists in the last years, even Andreas Zittel, although formally it has a very different appearance. There's very little, I can't work out much difference between what you're doing and they're doing as artists. So what are your thoughts on this? At what level, where does the presentation of your work sit in the culture? Is it okay if it's misread? Can it be misread when people deal with it as an equivalent form to certain aspects of contemporary sculpture? How do you negotiate that or deal with it?
Well, I don't know that. Does the temporariness mean that does it lend itself to being misread any more than?
It can be a positive misreading. It's purely a question about differentiation and being able to tell. There's very little difference in the way you've been working and certain artists have been working, which means there's been a cross-fertilization, whether or not both sides are always aware of it. And it goes in both directions. There are many architects who are basically talking artists through processes and vice versa. But it does seem to have a particular resonance when you get this supposedly natural combination of an art school department and an architecture department, that there seem to be these basic issues of I don't know, the danger of, well, on a dangerous level, you produce a sort of hermaphrodite, but I was thinking maybe that's a wrong, that maybe sounds negative, and I'm not sure hermaphrodites are negative, but a kind of a lack of ability to recognize what type of thing you are dealing with. Is that important for you?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean,
Right.
I think it's so you're engaging in some part of the city, in some kind of interaction with the public. How it's read is you know, it's not for us to say. It's not
Right.
necessarily for, you know, architects or artists to say either. I mean, it's really. I feel like with these kind of temporary things, you can have perhaps more of an effect, or you know, a different kind of effect than if it was like a permanent installation in a place. But either way, I mean, there's certain relations that others are going to read and determine what it's really doing for a culture.
But it's good to know from you that you have such a reading. I mean, we're gonna be careful in the future.
It's driven, as I want to say, in the case of Situ Studio and all these, by a function. It's driven by a function. It's not, and art installations can be driven by a function too, but Situ Studio in their case, and if you look at it, they're striving to respond to needs that are set out by, yes, the client, the villainous client, or the wonderful client. And in the case of, I'll say as the administrator in the architecture school who's putting through the pavilion thing, we searched for a client. This is not glorifying Columbia University. Maybe it will, we hope, or hope not, I don't know, depends on the students, depends. But in the way of thinking of like architects, we were desperate to find this client, because the client is what makes the rules, and the architecture needs the rules. As much as you want to say it doesn't. It doesn't want, it wants to do what it wants to do. It doesn't know what to do when it doesn't have rules. And so when we met finally the facilities manager of Columbia University, who said, oh, this has to be up during commencement and has all these rules, it was like, wow, great. Like, it has to respond. And so the university actually didn't, and it's funny, the event thing, because this money that we got from the provost never was intended for a pavilion. It was intended to produce events much like this. And we actually found that not very ambitious. Just inviting Anish Kapoor to talk about art and architecture, or Doug Aitken for that matter, didn't really respond enough to the kind of collaboration we wanted. So we've created this monster, right? We've created this pavilion idea. We've gone and found a client in the university, and we're kind of dragging everyone through it. So I just wanted to say also that I would love, before we wrap this up, to get 2 more questions from the students who might be working on this type of stuff.
Thank you. Maybe this is a naive question, but if temporary and permanent are not opposites, but rather 2 points along one timeline, then is the power, the transformative power of the pavilion, that it transforms whatever object you put in it or whoever passes through it, due in part to the fact that it in and of itself is transformative, erected, deconstructed rapidly? And if so, at what point does something temporary become permanent? Because when you showed the scaffolding through the cloth, or when you said the wood kept getting heavier as we added. I don't know where that line is, and clearly it's blurry, but maybe you have a better sense of it.
Well, I just want to quickly say the obvious, which is, of course, as a foreigner, every time for the last 20 years, whenever I've arrived back here, I've gone past the what appeared to be some temporary pavilions in Queens that I couldn't work out if they were what they appeared to be. And I think, from my side of it, the biggest danger of this pavilion is that it doesn't go away. Do you see what I mean? The taunting presence of the pavilion that was intended only temporarily, that the world is littered with temporary projects that were preserved or lasted. And I do think that the others should comment on this a bit, because it is fascinating.
I just want to say that, I mean, this is so obvious, but everything is temporary. I mean, you know, when I get a brief on a museum project, which I have gotten this, they'll tell you it's 25-year lifespan, which time it may get torn down, it may get added onto. So, I mean, it's an academic way to look at it, but I think that you can't draw those distinctions so precisely.
No, but that amazing presentation of the graphics of the, you know, take it, tear it down and build again, attitude is, does that mean that we should be looking, obviously this makes perfect sense, but beyond just looking at pavilions, it would seem to imply a certain methodology about looking at time in relation to construction and so on, to looking outside, to maybe going on a road trip rather than staying here.
I mean, there are a lot of buildings that were meant to be temporary and like expos, but became permanent. I mean, so those are interesting examples for you to look at. And what I wanted to say by showing the Japanese case is that the scale of temporality also differs in different culture. So in Japan, like if it lasts like more than 50 years, that's almost permanent nowadays. It used to be different, but.
And I think it's a great privilege to be in control of the demise of your own buildings. You know, it's like it's terrifying when you see them decay. So it's good. Gideon.
Thank you for a really stimulating presentation. I'm not an architect, but what I noticed in that all of your presentations had in common was that they stressed the beauty of the installation process and the performativity of the installation process, and also in some cases of the deconstruction. I was thinking about the Hirschhorn and thinking, what I really want to see is the bubble being inflated. And I wondered how much those of you who regularly build these structures plan for the aesthetics of the creation in public, and then the deconstruction as well, whether that's something that you really think about aesthetically. And if so, whether that's really a defining feature of temporary structures.
Well, I could say for the projects I showed, I mean, that was kind of the project. It's like we were designing that event, and you know, during that process we were sort of guiding where it would go, but I mean, the whole form was resolved during that event. Which you could then carry it through the entire like delivery, the assembly of it, and then through the life of the festival, which is also this short-term event. So it's kind of, I mean, that whole period of time, it was really the purpose in the case of those 3 pavilions.
I also think in the in situ case, there is you created a way of erecting the place that is kind of anxiety-free in a way, because it's not in architecture you usually have a prescriptive form. It needs to look this way at the end, and in your case you created a process. Therefore, it doesn't really matter so much how exactly it goes together, as long as kind of it goes through a series of rules.
Right.
Well, in our case, in a different case, it's different, but one thing I want to say is that after 9/11, I think even in a permanent structure, people started to imagine how it could collapse. I think that was the kind of whole, not eye-opener, that sounds positive, but very uncommon to see such an event and to realize how a building can be so vulnerable and collapse.
Yeah. I'm wondering if, or your thoughts, if you think that architecture is or pavilions are the most appropriate mode for architecture in this age, which is dominated by temporality and extremely fast pace of living, and that perhaps the pavilion in our age is the most appropriate means of having social effect.
I think so. I think that pavilions there will be more and more, and they will respond to this idea of gathering in the summertime, for different issues, and whether it's protest or commerce, there will be the whole gamut of reasons.
But you got to remember that the text I was reading, which was from 15 years ago, is itself also part of a critique of event culture or
Yes.
participation,
Yeah.
that I think at the very least during this process, and I think it's our obligation as a university to come up with some critical sensibility at least, if not something concrete about the, around these questions,
I wanted to say, I've been thinking about this all night. This in itself is an event. You mentioned that, and one of the things that I think Mark and you guys have done up here at Columbia is turn the school into only events. No, I'm being very harsh, but there are so many more events here than there were when I was here, when events were really significant and really special. Now I'm up here 7 times this semester. I mean, okay, no, that's really exciting. No, but the point is, and it's not a criticism. I think it's really I'm just saying that the world has changed into it's all event driven. I mean, you think about a tweet. That's not a handwritten letter. It's a tweet. And everything is about event. And so whether or not it's pavilions are the appropriate response, they're certainly reflective of a culture. But honestly, I mean, you can't house people that easily in them, and they aren't going to satisfy the bulk of what we need shelter to do ever.
Yeah,
no?
Just because it's event-driven, I don't think it bounds architecture to temporary structure.
No.
I mean, that's what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be critique. I didn't mean to.
No.
But I just think I'm observing.
But can I just spin it a little bit? That, I think that of course, as you know, there's events and events, and I'm aware that we're. Can I have a semi? Yeah, I'll have a penultimate word, and then you can have a word. That I just want to be a bit romantic for a minute, and to try and also break down a kind of false moralism about types of event. And years ago I was at doing something in Italy, and someone invited me to go to a communist festival. I have no idea what a communist festival is. I know what a communist is, but I don't. What's a communist festival? And I was driven out into the countryside near Pisa to the middle of nowhere, what felt like the middle of nowhere, and confronted by a series of ad hoc structures, some of which had been clearly designed, some of which had been clearly just thrown together. And in that place, in that kind of terrain of improvised structures, you had both on one hand like the biggest, most blown out Euro trash techno party I've ever been to in my life, and a place to discuss Gramsci and the idea of hegemony within political culture just alongside. And I'm not advocating that we could achieve anything like that, but we do at least have something in common with that sort of structure, in the sense that it's a bounding idea, a bounding identification that within it contains these potential extremes. So, yeah, that's all I can say about that. That's my penultimate word. Over to you, Professor.
I have no final word. I do believe that we started a process of making, and I believe that every student that is in the studio, every day of the studio, every meeting realizes the amount of consensus building that it takes to do anything. And I think when Gideon and I and Ben, and we started this conversation together, the four of us, the issue was, what can we do with this money that will be educational in a way that a talk is not? So we talked about, you can have this amount of money and invite 4 people. And so what is the event value or the educational value of having Chef Koons talk here and, and Rem? And so we decided Shaw can talk to students. They can see Rem in YouTube any day. So it's about the process as much as it is about the final product that the pavilion will be. And I hope to see you under the pavilion in May. Thank you.
How do we know it will be an under?